A photograph taken in 1952 shows something that should not exist. A point of light, bright, sharp, unmistakable, sitting in the night sky above California. Seconds later, on the very next exposure, it is gone. No trail, no fade, no explanation. 5 years before humanity launched its first satellite, something was already up there, and it blinked. This is not a rumor. It is not a grainy phone video shaking in someone's hand. It is a glass photographic plate, sealed in an archive, stamped with a date, catalogued by professional astronomers who had no idea what they were looking at until decades later, when a Swedish physicist pulled the plate out of storage and asked a question nobody else had thought to ask. What if the sky in the 1950s was not as empty as we assumed? Her name is Beatrice Villaruel. She works at the Nordic Institute for Theoretical Physics in Stockholm, and she did not set out to find aliens. She set out to find vanishing stars, objects that appear briefly in old sky surveys and then disappear from every later record. That alone would be a fascinating astrophysical puzzle. But what she found went further than flickering stars. She found points of light that appeared and vanished within the same hour, sometimes within minutes, captured on photographic plates from the Palomar Observatory in California, taken between 1949 and 1957. To understand why this matters, you need to understand what 1957 means. That is the year Sputnik 1 left the ground, the first man-made object to ever orbit the Earth. Before that date, there was nothing up there. No satellites, no space stations, no debris, no human hardware of any kind circling the planet. The sky was, in the most literal sense, pristine. So when Villaruel's team found bright, star-like objects that showed up on a photographic plate and were gone in the next exposure, taken from the same telescope, pointed at the same patch of sky, they were left with a question that refused to go away. If nothing man-made was in orbit, what was flashing on and off above Palomar in the early 1950s? The tool she used to hunt for these anomalies is called the Palomar Observatory Sky Survey, often shortened to POSSI. It was one of the most ambitious astronomical projects of its era, an effort to photograph the entire visible northern sky using a network of telescopes and glass photographic plates, each one a frozen snapshot of the heavens at a specific moment in time. These plates were never meant to catch UFOs. They were meant to catalog stars, galaxies, and nebulae for generations of astronomers who came after. But buried inside that catalog, hiding in plain sight for 70 years, were transients, points of light that should not have been transient at all. Villaruel's team cross-referenced thousands of these plates against modern sky surveys, including Pan-STARRS and the Gaia satellite catalog, two of the most precise star mapping systems ever built. If a point of light appeared on an old Palomar plate but had no corresponding object in any modern catalog, it became a candidate. Not proof of anything strange, just a mystery worth investigating. Most of these mysteries resolve quickly. Photographic plates from the 1950s were imperfect. They could be scratched, contaminated by cosmic rays, or affected by chemical processing errors that create fake points of light. Meteors burning up in the atmosphere can also produce brief flashes that mimic a star. Asteroids, reflecting sunlight as they tumble past Earth, can appear and vanish in a similar way. Villaruel knew all of this. Her team ruled out thousands of candidates for exactly these reasons. But some cases refused to be explained away so easily. The most striking involved 2 nights in July 1952. On those nights, multiple star-like points of light appeared and disappeared within a single hour, captured on plates from the same observing run. That timing alone would be interesting on its own. What makes it extraordinary is what else was happening in the summer of 1952, thousands of miles away, in the skies above the nation's capital. Between July 19th and July 26th of that year, radar operators at Washington National Airport picked up unidentified targets moving over restricted airspace above Washington, D.C. Fighter jets were scrambled. Pilots reported chasing bright lights that outmaneuvered their aircraft and then vanished. Newspapers ran front-page headlines. The Air Force held a press conference, the largest since the end of World War II, to address public panic. This event became known as the Washington Flap, one of the most documented and most debated UFO incidents in American history. Radar operators, control tower personnel, and commercial pilots all reported the same thing independently: fast-moving lights with no conventional explanation. Villaruel's team noticed that some of their brightest, most inexplicable transient detections on the Palomar plates fell within days of the Washington Flap. Not identical dates, but close enough in the same summer to raise an eyebrow among careful scientists. Correlation is not causation, and Villaruel has been consistently careful to say exactly that. She has never claimed her data proves extraterrestrial visitation. What she has said, publicly and repeatedly, is that these are anomalies, objects and events that do not fit known explanations using the tools currently available. That distinction matters. It is the difference between a scientist and a sensationalist, and it is precisely why her work has been taken seriously by peer-reviewed journals rather than dismissed outright. Her research did not stop at 1952. In a more recent analysis, Villarroel and her collaborators identified additional transient lights on 1950s-era plates that appeared to align in straight lines, a formation that is difficult to attribute to random noise or plate defects. Straight line alignments of bright objects are the kind of pattern that, in nature, tends to demand an explanation. Stars do not organize themselves into rows, neither do most natural transient phenomena. When something in astronomical data lines up geometrically, scientists take notice because geometry usually implies structure, and structure usually implies a cause. So what could cause a straight line of lights to appear and vanish within the same hour, decades before humans had any orbital technology capable of producing such a pattern? The honest answer is that nobody knows for certain. Several explanations have been proposed, and none of them fully satisfies every data point. The first and most mundane explanation is plate defects. Photographic plates from the 1950s were chemically developed by hand, and imperfections in that process could create fake bright spots. Dust, scratches, and chemical residue have all been known to mimic stars on old astronomical photographs. This explanation accounts for a significant portion of Villarroel's original catalog of anomalies, which is exactly why her team filtered so aggressively before publishing their strongest cases. The second explanation involves natural astronomical events. Flare stars, a class of red dwarf stars capable of sudden, dramatic increases in brightness, can appear to blink into existence and then fade within minutes. Some of the vanishing lights in Villarroel's data may be flare stars caught mid-eruption, a real and well-documented stellar phenomenon that has nothing to do with technology, alien or otherwise. Asteroids and near-Earth objects, catching sunlight at just the right angle before tumbling into shadow, can also create brief points of light that vanish from a telescope's field of view. The third explanation is cosmic ray strikes. High-energy particles from deep space occasionally hit a photographic plate directly, creating a bright spot that has nothing to do with anything in the sky at all. It is essentially noise in the instrument, not a signal. Modern digital sensors handle this kind of interference differently than old photographic emulsion did, which is part of why some of these anomalies simply do not exist in modern data. The technology used to capture the images has changed, and so has the type of error the technology introduces. The fourth explanation is the one that keeps this story alive online and in documentaries like this one. Something artificial, something not built by any nation on Earth, moving through the atmosphere or orbit in the early 1950s. This is the explanation Villarroel refuses to confirm or deny, because her data cannot answer that question. It can only tell you that something was there, briefly, and that it does not match anything currently cataloged. To understand why this particular mystery has captured so much attention, it helps to zoom out and look at a much older case, one that predates photography entirely. In the German city of Nuremberg, in April of 1561, residents reported a dramatic celestial event witnessed by an entire town. According to contemporary accounts and a famous woodcut illustration created at the time, the sky filled with objects described as spheres, tubes, and crosses, engaged in what witnesses described as a battle in the heavens, lasting nearly an hour before the objects reportedly fell to Earth in a cloud of smoke. This event has been debated by historians and astronomers for centuries. Some argue it was an early description of a sundog, an atmospheric optical phenomenon caused by ice crystals, refracting sunlight into multiple false suns and halos. Others argue the level of detail in the woodcut, showing distinct geometric shapes moving independently, does not match what a sundog typically produces. The Nuremberg case matters for one specific reason. It shows that humans have been documenting strange, unexplained aerial phenomena for as long as we have had the tools to record what we see. It did not begin with grainy military footage in the 21st century. It did not begin with radar blips over Washington in 1952. It goes back centuries, long before anyone had a reason to fake such a sighting for fame or clicks. Whatever explains the Nuremberg event, whether atmospheric optics or something else, it establishes a pattern. Unexplained sky phenomena are not a modern invention. They are a recurring feature of the historical record, showing up again and again across different eras, different cultures, and different levels of scientific understanding. Bringing this back to the 20th century, the connection between unexplained aerial phenomena and nuclear weapons has become one of the most persistent threads in the broader UFO conversation. Declassified United States military files, released in stages over the past several years, document a recurring pattern. Objects described as unidentified aerial phenomena, now officially called UAP by the Department of Defense, have repeatedly been reported near nuclear missile silos, nuclear test sites, and nuclear-armed submarines. Former Air Force personnel stationed at missile bases have testified under oath before Congress, describing incidents where nuclear missile systems inexplicably went offline at the exact moment unidentified objects were observed overhead. These are not fringe claims from anonymous internet accounts. They are testimonies given by military officers with security clearances Speaking to government oversight committees on the record, this pattern is precisely why some researchers find the timing of Villarroel's 1952 anomalies so compelling. The early 1950s were the height of atomic testing. The United States and the Soviet Union were both detonating nuclear devices with a frequency that seems almost unthinkable today, sometimes multiple tests per month. If there's any truth to the idea that unidentified objects have taken a specific interest in human nuclear technology, the early Cold War years would be exactly the period you would expect to see the most activity, and exactly the period Villarroel's data happens to cover. This is not the only ongoing effort trying to detect exactly this kind of activity using more modern methods. Search for extraterrestrial intelligence researchers, working through internationally coordinated campaigns, have used some of the most powerful radio telescopes on the planet to search nearby star systems for artificial signals. One recent and particularly notable campaign combined observations from the Carl G. Jansky Very Large Array in New Mexico and the Meerkat Radio Telescope in South Africa, pointing both instruments at K2-18b, an exoplanet that has drawn intense scientific interest due to potential atmospheric signatures suggestive of biological activity. Coordinating two major radio observatories for a single target is highly unusual and represents one of the most sensitive searches for artificial signals ever conducted around a specific exoplanet. The results, published in the Astronomical Journal, found no evidence of narrowband radio signals resembling human broadcasting technology, despite the team identifying millions of candidate signals that had to be processed and ruled out during analysis. A null result is still a result. It tells scientists where not to look, which is genuinely valuable information, even if it does not deliver the answer everyone hoped for. Separately, SETI researchers have also directed radio telescopes at 3I Atlas, an interstellar object passing through our solar system, searching for any radio emissions that might suggest artificial origin. Again, the search came back empty, aside from ordinary human-made interference that constantly floods radio astronomy data and has to be filtered out as background noise. These searches matter because they represent the opposite approach to Villarroel's work. Instead of digging through old photographic archives for evidence hiding in the past, SETI researchers are actively scanning the present, aiming powerful instruments at specific targets in real time, hoping to catch a signal the moment it arrives. Both approaches have found tantalizing hints. Neither has found definitive proof. And that combination, hints without proof, hope without certainty, is exactly the state the entire search for extraterrestrial life currently occupies. There is also a subtler possibility raised by recent SETI research that deserves attention here. A study suggested that alien signals, if they exist, might not be reaching Earth in a form we could easily recognize. Not because the signals are absent, but because the turbulent plasma surrounding their home stars could be scrambling and distorting the signal before it ever leaves that star system. If true, this means our search methods might be fundamentally mismatched to the nature of the evidence we are hoping to find. We could be listening for a clean signal when the reality is closer to a message that arrives garbled, fractured, and unrecognizable by the time it crosses interstellar distances. This idea connects directly back to Villarroel's photographic anomalies. In both cases, the central problem is not necessarily the absence of evidence. It may be our inability to recognize evidence that does not look the way we expect it to look. So, where does this leave the 1952 vanishing lights, the Washington flap, and the broader question of whether any of this constitutes real evidence of a non-human presence? The honest, unglamorous answer is that it remains genuinely unresolved. Villarroel's data represents a legitimate scientific anomaly, verified through peer review, filtered carefully against known sources of error, and published transparently for other scientists to examine, challenge, and attempt to replicate. That alone makes it more credible than the overwhelming majority of claims that circulate under the UFO label. At the same time, an anomaly is not proof. A gap in our understanding is not the same as a confirmed answer. Villarroel has spent her career walking that line carefully, refusing to sensationalize her own findings even as public interest and media coverage have occasionally tried to sensationalize them for her. What makes this story different from countless other UFO claims is the paper trail. This is not a blurry photograph from an anonymous witness with no way to verify authenticity. This is a documented scientific archive, physically preserved for 70 years, cross-checked against multiple modern star catalogs using rigorous statistical methods, published through peer review, and openly available for other researchers to scrutinize. Skeptics can examine the same plates Villarroel examined. They can apply their own filtering methods. They can propose their own explanations. That transparency is exactly what separates real scientific inquiry from speculation, and it is exactly why this case continues to generate serious academic debate rather than fading into internet folklore. There is something quietly profound about the fact that the strongest evidence currently under serious scientific discussion did not come from a secret government file or a leaked military report. It came from a university archive, sitting in storage, waiting patiently for 70 years until someone finally thought to ask a different question of old data. That is how much of real scientific discovery actually happens. Not through dramatic revelation, but through careful, patient re-examination of information that was there all along, misunderstood or simply overlooked, until a new perspective reveals something nobody noticed the first time around. Villarroel and her collaborators continue this work today, running citizen science projects that invite amateur astronomers and students, including participants in Algeria and Nigeria, to help comb through archival images for additional transient anomalies. The scale of the task is enormous. Terabytes of old photographic data exist across observatories worldwide, most of it never fully digitized or cross-referenced against modern catalogs. Every additional case that gets identified, verified, and filtered against known explanations adds another data point to a puzzle that remains stubbornly incomplete. Every case that gets ruled out as a plate defect or a flare star and narrows the possibilities and sharpens the remaining mystery. This is slow, unglamorous, methodical work, the opposite of a cinematic breakthrough. And yet, it may be exactly the kind of work capable of eventually producing a genuine answer. The bigger question this entire investigation raises extends far beyond a handful of photographic plates from Palomar Observatory. It asks whether humanity has been systematically underprepared to recognize evidence of something unfamiliar, even when that evidence has been sitting directly in front of us the entire time. We built telescopes to catalog stars, not to detect the unexpected. We built radar systems to track aircraft, not unidentified objects capable of impossible maneuvers. Our entire scientific infrastructure was designed around expected phenomena, and when something unexpected shows up, it often takes decades, sometimes generations, before anyone develops the tools, the curiosity, or the willingness to look at old data with fresh eyes. That is precisely what happened here. Nobody working at Palomar Observatory in 1952 believed they were photographing anything unusual. They were doing routine survey work, cataloging the sky one plate at a time, unaware that buried within their meticulous documentation sat a handful of images that would eventually reignite one of the oldest questions in human history. Are we alone? 70 years later, that question remains just as open as it was the night those lights appeared and vanished above California. Unnoticed, unexplained, and waiting. Consider, for a moment, the sheer scale of what still sits unexamined. Palomar alone produced tens of thousands of glass plates during its original survey years, and Palomar was only one observatory among dozens operating during that era. Every one of those plates was developed by hand, stored in wooden cabinets, and largely forgotten once the immediate cataloging work was finished. Nobody had the computing power in 1955 to cross-reference a single plate against a modern star catalog containing billions of entries. That kind of comparison simply did not exist as a scientific possibility until recent decades, when digital sky surveys finally reached the resolution and scale needed to make the comparison meaningful. In other words, the tools required to even notice these anomalies did not exist until long after the anomalies were recorded. The evidence was frozen in amber, so to speak, waiting for the technology of the future to catch up with the observations of the past. This lag between observation and analysis is not unique to astronomy. It shows up throughout the history of science. Ancient sailors recorded strange lights over open water for centuries before anyone understood ball lightning as an atmospheric electrical phenomenon. Farmers described crop damage caused by unseen forces long before meteorologists connected the pattern to microbursts and downdrafts. Entire generations lived and died without ever knowing the true explanation for things they witnessed with their own eyes, not because the explanation was impossible to find, but because nobody yet had the framework needed to find it. Villarroel's work fits neatly into this long pattern. She is not claiming to have solved a mystery. She is claiming to have finally built a framework capable of asking the right question of data that has existed for 70 years. Skeptics remain an essential counterweight here, and their role should not be dismissed as obstruction. Rigorous skepticism separates careful science from wishful thinking. Astronomers who study photographic archives point out that emulsion degradation, temperature fluctuations during development, and even dust settling on a plate before it was sealed can all produce false transients, indistinguishable from something genuinely unexplained. Some critics argue that with millions of stars cataloged across thousands of plates, a small number of statistical anomalies is not just expected, it is inevitable. Given a large enough data set, strange coincidences will appear somewhere purely by chance without needing any exotic explanation. This is a legitimate argument, and any serious researcher in this field has to reckon with it directly rather than brushing it aside. Villarroel's own published methodology attempts to address this exact criticism head-on. Rather than presenting every unexplained point of light as significant, her team applies statistical thresholds designed to isolate only the cases that fall well outside what random chance and known plate defects would predict. The straight line alignments, Discussed earlier are a direct response to this challenge. Random noise does not typically organize itself into geometric patterns. A scratch on a plate does not usually produce 3 or 4 points of light spaced at consistent intervals along a single line. When a pattern like that appears, it raises the statistical improbability of a purely random or purely mechanical explanation, even if it does not prove an artificial one. This is the careful, incremental way real scientific mysteries get narrowed down, not through a single dramatic discovery, but through a slow process of elimination that gradually makes some explanations less likely and others more difficult to dismiss. It is worth pausing to acknowledge how differently this story unfolds compared to the typical UFO narrative most people know. There is no dramatic whistleblower, no leaked government memo, no blurry video shot on a shaking cell phone at 3 in the morning. Instead, there's a Swedish astrophysicist publishing in peer-reviewed journals, working with international teams of citizen scientists, applying statistical rigor to old photographic archives, and refusing to claim more than her data supports. If this story eventually leads somewhere extraordinary, it will not be because someone shouted the loudest. It will be because the evidence, examined patiently and skeptically over years, simply could not be explained away by anything conventional. That patience stands in sharp contrast to the pace of the broader public conversation around unidentified aerial phenomena, which has accelerated dramatically over the past several years. Congressional hearings, once unthinkable on this topic, have become a recurring event in Washington. Military witnesses have testified under oath about encounters that defy conventional aircraft performance, describing objects capable of instantaneous acceleration, sustained hypersonic speeds without visible propulsion, and maneuvers that would kill a human pilot if attempted inside a conventional cockpit. The Pentagon's own dedicated office for Trackee